China is outraged after a Japanese high-ranking official visits Taiwan. Beijing has warned about the consequences of the visit for Sino-Japanese relations.
China is resolutely opposed to this and has already made solemn representations to Japan. Since the start of the year, Japan has said it respects its promises on the Taiwan issue, but actually it's been provocative in actions, which has caused serious disturbance to the improvement of Sino-Japanese ties.
Tokyo says Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs and Communications Jiro Akama has paid a visit to Taiwan to attend a tourism promotion event. Akama is the highest level government official to travel to Taiwan since 1972. Tokyo severed diplomatic relations with Taipei back then.
China appears to have largely completed major construction of military infrastructure on artificial islands it has built in the South China Sea and can now deploy combat planes and other military hardware there at any time. The Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, or AMTI, part of Washington's Center for Strategic and International Studies, said the work on Fiery Cross, Subai, and Mischief Reefs in the Spratly Islands included naval, air, radar, and defensive facilities. China has denied U.S. charges that it is militarizing the South China Sea, although last week Premier Li Keqiang said defense equipment had been placed on islands in the disputed waterway to maintain freedom of navigation. China's 3 air bases in the Spratlys and another on Woodley Island in the Paracel chain further north would allow its military aircraft to operate over nearly the entire South China Sea, a key global trade route that Beijing claims most of. Several neighboring states have competing claims in the sea, which is widely seen as a potential regional flashpoint.
We are going to start today with news of some exercises by China. The Chinese government has released images of military drills conducted adjacent to its border with North Korea as the regime continues to make nuclear and missile threats. The state-run Chinese network system reported Monday that a Chinese army unit stationed in the northeastern province of Jilin conducted exercises near the border last Friday that were aimed at verifying the response time of its forces. Now, watchers say the move is a means of upping military readiness against growing signs of an imminent North Korean nuclear test or intercontinental ballistic missile launch.
Well, the first UN talks on a global nuclear weapons ban are set to kick off with the participation of more than 100 countries in New York. The meeting comes weeks after the world body adopted a historic resolution calling on member states to start negotiations on a treaty to ban nukes. Last October, 123 countries agreed that they would launch the UN conference despite objection from most of the world's declared and undeclared nuclear powers. Britain, France, Israel, Russia, and the U.S. voted against the move, while China, India, and Pakistan abstained. The countries leading the effort include Austria, Ireland, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, and Sweden. Hundreds of NGOs backed too. They say that the threat of a nuclear disaster is growing, and international consensus is needed for an effective nuclear disarmament.
Now, the first negotiations on a treaty to ban nuclear weapons kicked off at the UN headquarters in New York on Monday, but it did so without support of major nuclear powers, and that includes the United States, Great Britain and France. About 40 nations are known to have boycotted the conference, which was attended by more than 100 others, amid rising nuclear threats out of Pyongyang.
The US's envoy said national security required nuclear arms because of bad actors who could not be trusted.
There is nothing I want more for my family than a world with no nuclear weapons. But we have to be realistic. Is there anyone that believes that North Korea would agree to a ban on nuclear weapons?
Britain's envoy was equally sceptical about the success of a complete ban.
The UK is not attending the negotiations on a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons because we do not believe that those negotiations will lead to effective progress on global nuclear disarmament. They cannot and will not work.
para todo, la base para el desarrollo de cualquier sociedad. Si no hay un estándar mínimo de seguridad, no se puede invertir en educación, no se puede invertir en una seguridad social, no se puede invertir en el desarrollo de las empresas, en crear un Estado de Derecho sólido para prosperar.
Esta gente se dedica a vender armamento, misiles. Esto sí que es apología de la violencia. Nos dedicamos a la acción directa no violenta contra todo lo que es el militarismo. Para apoyar a las personas desplazadas por la guerra, y los mismos que provocan la guerra después se vuelven a beneficiar pues con la venta de material y tecnología para controlar a los que obligan a salir de sus casas.
American troops are headed to the fight against ISIS. Pentagon producer Lucas Tomlinson tells us how many and where they're going.
U.S. defense officials tell Fox 2 companies from the 82nd Airborne Division based at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, some 200 troops in all, will be departing soon for the ISIS fight in Mosul. This comes days after the USS George H.W. Bush entered the Persian Gulf to begin airstrikes against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. The Pentagon is also ramping up operations against terrorist groups around the world, with increasing focus on the African continent. U.S. officials tell Fox the Department of Homeland Security's recent ban on electronic devices larger than cell phones on flights to the United States from some Muslim nations was imposed in part because a laptop was used to bomb this Somali airliner last year. Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Somalia, claimed responsibility for the attack, and the top U.S. general for Africa says the terror group could strike again in the future.
I think Al-Shabaab has demonstrated they could do this in the past, so I think it's something that we just continue to watch and have to stay after.
This increasing terrorist threat from Al-Shabaab is one of the reasons General Waldhauser recently asked the new administration for greater authority to strike Al-Qaeda's third largest affiliate on his own terms.
I think the combatant commanders, myself included, are more than capable of making judgments and determinations on some of these targets, and I'm well capable, and we are all well capable of making those calls.
General Waldhauser recently told Congress Al-Shabaab regained territory last year and today continues to carry out attacks on U.S.-backed African forces and Western hotels in the capital, Mogadishu. 3,000 miles north of Somalia, ISIS remains a nagging problem with up to 200 fighters regrouping in southern Libya, requiring the continued presence of U.S. Special Operations Forces on the ground to help with future airstrikes.
ISIS has not left. Keep a presence on the ground because you have to have that there. And we're going to develop intelligence and take out targets when they arise.
Daesh could go bankrupt if it loses all its territory. The group's revenues have already halved, dropping from approximately 1.89 billion in 2014 to 870 million in 2016. Daesh is still considered one of the richest terrorist organizations. The group has made money from oil, taxes and fines, kidnappings, looting and confiscating property. But its business model might fail soon as its territory slowly shrinks. Operations by the militaries of several countries have forced Daesh to retreat. That includes airstrikes and ground offensives not only in Iraq but in Syria. Now, if the terrorist group goes bankrupt, will that be the end of Daesh? Their operations and ability to attack require little funding, as they rely more on inspiring attackers through their propaganda, and are in a hurry to claim attacks in many cases. So can Daesh actually be defeated?
With Passover just a few weeks away, Israelis all over the country are making possible travel plans. But the Israeli Counterterrorism Bureau has just issued heavy travel warnings to Jordan, Turkey, and Egypt. According to the Bureau, these 3 countries which border Islamic State-controlled territories are at a high risk for attacks. The governmental body specifically warned of both attacks and attempts to kidnap Israeli citizens. Among countries outside the Middle East that the Counterterrorism Bureau warned against are Russia, France, Belgium, Germany, and India. The head of the Counterterrorism Bureau said, quote, "The more the Islamic State or ISIS is backed into a corner, the more it would try to execute attacks across the world on every possible front, against Christians, Crusaders, and Jews. Israel is not at the center of the threats, but Israelis are required to be vigilant, end quote. Turkey received the second highest threat warning, where Israelis are advised not to visit, and if they're already visiting, to return immediately. Egypt and Jordan received the third highest level, indicating a basic concrete threat, meaning Israelis are advised to avoid these areas. The Sinai Peninsula specifically, however, received a very high threat evaluation, with the bureau head saying that ISIS in the Sinai, quote, have no red lines, and that Israelis entering the Sinai during the holiday would be irresponsible, end quote. According to the report from the Kremlin, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and Russian President Vladimir Putin are said to meet in Moscow on May 11th. The two leaders have not held a meeting together in Moscow since April of 2015. Putin and Abbas are said to discuss the stalled Middle East peace process, the general situation in the Middle East, and the results of the annual summit of Arab League states, which is scheduled for later in the week in Amman. According to both Kremlin and other sources, Russia has expressed multiple times an interest in mediating a peace process between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. According to the Russian Foreign Ministry, Putin had even invited both Abbas and PM Netanyahu to Moscow for direct talks, but no such meeting has yet been scheduled. Thus far, the PA has consistently refused direct negotiations in favor instead of internationally imposed resolutions and preconditions.
Russian officials have welcomed Iranian President Hassan Rouhani as he arrives in Moscow for a two-day visit. Now, Rouhani is scheduled to visit with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, and Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev during his stay in Moscow. Before flying to Russia, Rouhani called for more cooperation between Tehran and Moscow in the energy sector, and that Tehran welcomes Russia's investment in the Islamic Republic. He said that Tehran and Moscow hold a similar stance on the fight against terrorism. During his visit, the two sides are to sign several economic and trade agreements and discuss regional and global developments.
India says it plans to seal borders with Pakistan and Bangladesh in an effort to fight what it calls terrorism, smuggling, drug trafficking, and problems of illegal immigration.
We have decided to seal the borders with Pakistan and Bangladesh as soon as possible. I know it's a difficult task due to mountains, dense forests and difficult terrains, but we will use technological solution wherever needed.
The minister was on a two-day visit to border areas where he interacted with border guard officers and civil administrators to review defense preparedness. India's decision to close borders comes amid heightened tensions with Pakistan. The tensions began to rise following a deadly attack on an Indian military base in Indian-controlled Kashmir last year. New Delhi blamed the attack on Pakistan. Islamabad vehemently rejected that. The two neighbors have also been trading sporadic firing along the border region of Jammu and Kashmir. India and Pakistan brawl continues mainly over disputed Kashmir region, which both claimed since their partition and independence from Britain in 1947.